Welcome back to the Commercial Connections podcast. Today, we're doing a special segment called Multifamily Minute, where Renee and I look at trends we're seeing in the Eugene Springfield multifamily market and answer real questions local owners are bringing to us every week. Today's topic is a clean, straightforward 1031 exchange that protects equity and supports the next generation, based on a real client scenario from a local investor. We'll call her Sarah.
So Sarah owns a property 50-50 with her brother, and her brother wants to buy out her share. Sarah's share is worth $200,000 if she sells outright, but she would face roughly a $45,000 capital gains tax consequence. So when she reached out to me, she said, "Yikes, I think I need some help." And this property had been in her family for the last 20 years. And she wanted to find out what were the options because her real long-term goal is she wanted to pass this equity on to her adult children. So the house was originally owned by Sarah's mom. So grandma owned the house, and grandma said, "Upon my passing, I really want this to go to the grandkids." So Sarah and her brother deeded themselves onto the property about 15 years ago when mom was starting to show pretty significant age, and they knew that she might be going into like assisted living. And grandma said, again, "I want this to go to the grandkids." So fast forward, grandma finally passes away, and now Sarah wants to figure out, okay, now my brother's going to buy me out, and they own this property as tenants in common. So she has a pretty clean path to do this through a 1031 exchange and accomplish her goals.
It's such a classic moment. A simple exit becomes the perfect opportunity to make a strategic shift. So let's talk about the options that you walked her through.
Yeah, there are really two clean paths or opportunities here. So the first one would be she could exchange into another investment property where she could assign it to an LLC or hold it for an investment and then later gift membership interest to her kids with small tax efficient amounts. Okay, now I need to build a caveat in here. I am not a lawyer, I am not a CPA, and I am not a 1031 exchange specialist, and I do not play one on daytime TV. All I want the audience to know is there's options. Because Sarah was, when she initially called me, she said, there's got to be an easy way out on this. And really, the government is going to want you to pay capital gains. So you're either going to pay it today or you'll pay it down the road. And in Sarah's situation, she was trying to figure out how not to pay that $45,000 today so she doesn't diminish how much she would have to pass on to her adult children.
Perfect. So the first option is to exchange into an investment property. But what's the second option?
Well, the second option is a little cleaner, in my opinion, because with $200,000 in the Eugene Springfield market, you're probably going to buy a single family property, or you could buy something larger like a duplex, but you're now going to have to add debt. And you got to remember, Sarah and her husband are in their mid 60s. So they're not real hip on taking on debt. When you get to that age, you want to be as free as possible. So a different option, or option two for Sarah, is that she can exchange into a Delaware Statutory Trust, which means she is not dealing with tenants, she's not dealing with a property manager, and she's receiving passive income from the Delaware Statutory Trust. And it's fully tax deferred. You can 1031 exchange into a Delaware Statutory Trust. What we typically see with Delaware Statutory Trusts, that about every 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years, the sponsor will come to the owner and say, we're getting ready to sell or we're going to refinance. Do you want to roll forward with your money or do you want to take your cash out? So down the road, she would have an opportunity where she could delay and pay her capital gains 5, 7, 10 years down the road. And one of the reasons that she may even want to consider that is if she's still working, she's just in her 60s. So if she was still working, as an example, and earning high income, she might want to delay and pay those capital gains when her retirement income is probably going to be lower than her wages. So for some owners who want a hands-free investment, the Delaware Statutory Trust is a great option because it gives them an acceptable trade-off. They get to 1031 their money into a fund. Someone else is managing it. They're not dealing with tenants, toilets, or trash. And they're basically receiving monthly income off of that.
And if you're listening to this and thinking, I probably need clarity on my own properties before I make a big decision, Rene is now offering a free pinpoint price evaluation. We also have the fall 2025 Eugene Springfield apartment snapshot and the fall 2025 U of O market snapshot. You can find those links in the show notes. What I love about Sarah's case is how simple the legacy piece becomes once the exchange happens.
Yes, because if she holds the replacement property until her passing, then her kids received a stepped up basis. And what that means is they inherit the asset at its current market value, not the original price, which effectively eliminates the built in gain. And it basically gives them current market value and they don't have to worry about paying capital gains. One thing that I've noticed is that generational wealth is passed on, especially to the younger generation, to adult children. They've seen how hard mom and dad had to work. So they don't want the headache. They don't want the management. They don't want to deal with tenants. They want the cash. And it's not that they're greedy. It's maybe they need to put their kids through college or fund their retirement or whatever that money could do for them. So, for many families who transfer wealth efficiently, that stepped up in the basis is the most valuable tool that is available by just doing a 1031 exchange, keeping that property in your portfolio, and then passing it to your heirs upon your death.
Can you explain a stepped up basis like in the simplest of terms?
Yeah, stepped up basis is literally if Sarah sold the property and passed it to her kids today, she would have a tax consequence because IRS says that you effectively should hold that property for ideally 2 years, 2 tax return years before you do something with it. Otherwise, all you were really trying to do was circumvent and go around the 1031 rules and not pay the capital gains up front. With stepped up basis, upon your passing, then your estate attorney is going to have your estate get an appraisal of the property. And then they're going to look at the value of the house. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I bought my house with my husband in 2000, 2005, and we literally spent $250,000 on the house. Back then, that was market. When my husband passed away in 2022, then I had to have an appraisal done on my home and it was closer to 900,000 and they took half of that value and gave it to me on my side of the ledger and said, "Here's your stepped up basis from your husband's portion since he's passed away and you're on title with him. Here's your stepped up basis." And what it does is it minimizes the tax consequence when you get ready to sell down the road. Does that help? Does that explain it?
It does. Yeah, and that was a really good example that you used. That's so interesting to know that you also get the stepped up basis if your spouse dies, but you're still living in the house. Yeah.
So I'll give you another example because I'm in Sarah's shoes. I bought a single family rental property in South Eugene for my son when he was 5 years old. I've owned it as a rental. He now lives in it as a rental. I have to charge him close to market rent. You're supposed to charge close to or market rent. You really don't want to let them live in it for free because then the IRS says, no, you didn't charge market rent. So this really wasn't a true asset. And I would love to give this house to my son. And I've talked to my CPA multiple times, but I don't want to do that right now because he would lose the stepped up basis. So if we wait instead until I pass, then he gets the house and he gets it at current market value with no tax consequence. Then he could sell it and go move up to a bigger, nicer house without any tax consequence. And it's like I just handed him a sack of tax-free cash.
That's a really important thing to remember. There's all these different avenues, but you just have to talk to an expert to find out what the best option is for you. So, going back, if Sarah does choose an LLC path, there's a gifting advantage too, right?
Exactly. So Sarah and her husband can gift up to the annual exclusion amount every year per child. And her children are adults and are married, so they can actually gift to Johnny, their son, plus Johnny's wife when they're gifting through an LLC. And that helps you pass your assets faster to your heirs and avoid any tax consequence. So what that means is that she can basically transfer a more economic value to her kids while using less of her lifetime exemption. And really, when you get that deep into it, you really want to be checking with your CPA, David Moore, or a 1031 exchange specialist, or CPA, David Moore, an estate attorney.
That makes long-term transition so much more controlled and intentional. So, you also talked about her option to do a DST product, and those are gaining momentum.
Yeah, there's a new one that has recently rolled out to the market, and it's actually the biggest, largest DST sponsor in the United States. And they're building one around single family rental properties. Now, I can't really talk much about it because I'm not licensed. You have to have a Series 7 license to really talk about it. David Moore of 1031 Exchange has several videos on his website. And Brittany, just drop into the show notes the access to David's website. But what he shared with me is they basically treat it as a triple net property. So, what that means is they're running the management company, they're screening the individual tenants, they're making sure that all the expenses are paid. I believe there's no recourse debt, and it gives you a single family properties as a diversified asset, as opposed to you being the little flea on the dog's tail. If you go into a DST and they buy a 3 or a 500 unit apartment complex, you're going to be locked into that DST for 7 to 10 years until they decide to do something with the money. But if you're in a DTS where they're buying single family properties, that gives you a lot more flexibility. And I believe the minimum is $25,000 to buy into that. So for someone like Sarah, who really wants simplicity and passive income, this could really be a great option.
Yeah, talk more about how she would structure that $25,000 out of the DST.
Yeah. So, she's expecting to net 200,000 from the sale of her brother. There's a couple of things that I often see that people do. Either they have personal debt, or if they're older and like in their 60s, they may want to peel some cash off and tuck it into a reserve account and build a nest egg of cash for themselves. It's funny, when health hits, it can wipe you out so quick. Or if all of a sudden you have to put your spouse in memory care or assisted living, that takes a lot of cash up front to get them stabilized and get them into that services. So you can pull cash from a sale. So Sarah is going to net 200,000 from the sale of that property. She could peel off 25 or 50,000. She's going to pay tax on that, but she's not paying tax on the full 200. So that's one of the beauties of a $25,000 minimum. The other benefit, or the beautiful thing about these smaller opportunities, is often people will call me and say, "Hey, I want to sell my duplex and then I want to go buy commercial." Well, right now in Eugene, Springfield, it really costs about $1 million to get into anything commercial. A lot of landlords are frustrated with tenant landlord law and the regulations related to rental property, and they want to get out and they want a 1031 exchange into commercial. and they don't quite have enough yet to get into that. So a DTS or a DST, either one that you want to go into, could be the way to go. But again, you need to check with a subscription company that sells those services. That's not what I do. I'm just a broker. I happen to know David Moore, who I think is probably one of the smartest 1031 exchange strategists. And he is an exchange facilitator. He could walk you through, and he's not a sponsor either, but he can walk you through how to 1031 exchange, how much you could pull back in cash if you needed to pay off debt, or if you wanted to build a nest egg, or if you want to pass a little cash to your kids. You know, Brittany, in your age category, I feel really sorry for people who are trying to buy a house because you're competing against other people who literally are getting $500,000 to $700,000 checks from their parents of cash so they can go buy a house and not have to compete with other buyers. So for some people, they may want to peel a little bit of cash off to give to their kids for a down payment at least, and just take the tax hit today rather than just paying tax on 200,000. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's great advice. We have this, next generation coming up. There's a lot of questions where, I think some people I've even heard equate it to the biggest wealth transfer in the history of America. So I think we all have a lot of questions right now about where we stand. But I think what you said about David Moore and the way he helps people, he does have great resources, and I'm going to put those links below. And these are just a lot of the questions that we've been getting a lot of the time, like over the past few weeks, that we wanted to clear up in this episode. And owners want simplicity and clarity. And with it costing so much to get into commercial real estate, and with landlord tenant laws not being very stabilized right now, rents aren't rising what they need to. And also with maintenance and like insurance costs rising way more than they probably should. Just like past what landlords can afford. It makes sense why people have a lot of questions right now and want clarity. So, what are some things you would remind owners of to just keep in mind right now?
Well, you know, it's funny when you started to talk about rents because you work on my team. So you hear me talk about the pain points of sellers right now and people that own multifamily. Rents are starting to soften, their expenses are going up, they're having to manage the property managers more, the laws are tightening. But you, as a tenant, you probably feel like your rent is going up. I know that you and your husband have moved a couple of times, and
Yeah.
you watch what rents are in Portland and in the Eugene market. It's crazy what some of the new rents
Yeah.
are. Well, I think back to your question, I think one thing that I want an owner to take away from this is a buyout does not have to be the end of the story. It's just a moment to give you an opportunity to reposition into something different. So that could look like preserving equity, like in Sarah's situation, where she most likely is going to 1031 exchange into a single family property and then use that money and possibly give some of that monthly income to her kids. But she's definitely going to start doling out portions of the LLC on an annual basis so that upon her passing, her kids will be more of an owner in the LLC. Now, the drawback of that, and I have a good friend who her family did this. She just said to me yesterday, she said, I'm not sure that was the best thing for my sister and I. She said, because now my mom's 86 years old. She's probably going to pass away sometime soon. And I'm not going to get the stepped up basis. Yes, I own 98% of the LLC that controls those assets, but I'm not going to get the stepped up basis. So you really have to think it through. Yes, we all would love to help our kids and hand them a sack of cash and help leapfrog them forward, because it's a struggle right now for most people that are working with inflation and everything else. You just love to ease that burden and hand your kids a sack of cash. But are you really helping them compared to you continuing to be a good steward of that asset? And then upon your passing, give it to them because they get it a stepped up basis, which is really kind of the equivalent of tax free. You're giving them a sack of cash where they're just not going to pay that. And it really supports the next generation at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. So To close out this episode, what's one final thought for Sarah's situation?
Well, here are four truths that I would want any owner to remember. Number one, selling outright can create unnecessary taxes, so you need to do your homework. Tenant-in-common ownerships allow each party to choose their own path. So if, like in Sarah's situation where she owns it with her brother, he's going to buy her out and now she's going to have the opportunity to go do something with her portion. Number three, legacy planning belongs inside your investment decisions. Because to me, that's the reason we own property. We're owning it for our own wealth, but also creating generational wealth to pass on to family. And then the fourth one is your replacement property does not have to be hands on. There's lots of passive options out there like DSTs, DTSs, where you can just receive a check in the mail and you don't have to be involved with the management.
Yeah. And if you find yourself thinking, I need clarity on my own partnership or portfolio, Renee is offering those pinpoint price evaluations for free right now. We also have the fall 2025 U of O market snapshot and the 2025 Eugene Springfield apartment snapshot available if you'd like to check those out. You'll find all of those resources in the show notes so you can understand exactly where you're positioned in the market today. And if this episode was helpful, we'd be so grateful if you'd leave us a quick review on Apple Podcasts. You can also subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. You can leave us comments or questions if you want us to answer those in the next episodes. We also are doing a free giveaway right now. So if you take a screenshot of your Apple podcast and send it to us in a DM, we will do a monthly drawing for a chance to win a copy of Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. We recommend this book because often his negotiation principles apply directly to multifamily investing, especially when you're navigating offers, inspections, and partnership conversations. His advice gives owners a clearer, calmer approach to negotiating in today's market. And we just think that information is invaluable. So we're so happy you could join us today. And we hope to see you again. Thank you for listening in on our new segment of Multifamily Minute. And we'll be back with more commercial connections. See you soon.